Thank you everyone for coming, for everyone that's here with us in person and everyone that is joining us online. Welcome to Technology and Futures. I'm your moderator slash panelist, Audrey T. Williams, and I am so excited for this conversation today. To my immediate left, we have Liz Henry, and I will just read a little bit of a bio for Liz. And so Liz Henry is a writer, translator, blogger, zine publisher, and hackerspace fan. You can find their poetry in the book Unruly Islands, coming out from Aqueduct Press, many zines digitized for Kindle, and translations on bookmaniac.org, or as part of Carmen, is it Berenguer's autobiography and poetry, Eli. Thank you. Thank you, Liz. And also joining us today, Cory Doctorow. Yeah. Cory Doctorow is a science fiction novelist, journalist, and technology activist. He is the author of many books, most recently, The Bezel, a follow-up to Red Team Blues, and The Lost Cause, a solar punk science fiction novel of hope amidst the climate emergency. His most recent nonfiction book is The Internet Con, How to Seize the Means of Computation, a big tech disassembly manual. His other works include Choke Point Capitalism, nonfiction about monopoly and creative labor markets, the Little Brother series for young adults, and he's known for coining the term "enshittification" to describe social media platform decline. Thank you, Cory. So we've had the opportunity to spend some time together this morning chatting about technology and futures, and the way that we'd like this conversation to go is we're just going to kind of break it up into a couple of rounds. With a few different topics that have risen top of mind. So we want to talk about things like what's working versus what isn't working. And so starting with one of the topics that Liz brought up, let me just frame this up a little bit, because we're in Preservation Park, the idea of preserving culture is one of the things that we talked about. And so Liz, we'd love to hear your thoughts on preservation of culture specific to geography, culture and location. Like that's one of the things
that is, yeah, we were kind of dipping into that
a little bit,
and that was kind of my meatiest thing to talk about.
Sure,
jump right in.
Oh,
so I've been thinking about this because, well, first of all, kind of what is technology? We're talking about technology, but I want to say that we transmit a lot of technology through culture, and it's kind of wrapped in that whole envelope. The book I'm reading right now, which I want to hook everything I'm talking about into, is Archangels of Funk by Andrea Hairston. It's the sequel to Redwood and Wildfire. Super good, super wild. It's like this amazing kind of kaleidoscopic book about how we, it's kind of about resistance and preserving culture and kindness and joy and everything about culture, kinship. Within kind of pockets of resistance within a world that is somewhat hostile or dangerous. And I love everything about that. To list some other themes that run through that book. Some of them are like the spectrum of different kinds of sentience or being. So there are dog and cyborg dog points of view characters in the novel, as well as little kind of AI circus bots that sometimes I think maybe become the avatars of different gods. And so it's like this giant World's Fair, festival preparation, battleground that's happening in a sort of mutual aid anarchist, socialist anarchist cooperative farm. Love it. That's kind of what I was talking about preserving culture. I have way more to say about that. Another book that really reminds me, that makes me think of all those themes together, is Annalee Newitz's The Terraformers. And so there we see a lot of biotech, but also tech. You know, if you think of like mechanical electronics kind of things as technology. But the technology of there, it is about preserving certain kinds of geographic or ecological preservation, but somebody has to decide what that ecology is, what's getting preserved and what's getting rejected. And it's very possible that by preserving one thing and fighting very hard to preserve something, you're rejecting, you know, the possibility of something new arising, or even destroying, to do things as they do arise. I saw that come up a lot also for a little bit, it made me think a lot in the Malcolm Older's new series. So the Beginning of Known Successes. So they're on a gas giant planet and it's a murder mystery and it's kind of Sherlock Holmes. It's just delightful in every way, beautiful writing. But there's a zoo, like a preservation, Earth ecology zoo, and all of the advanced studies are about studying how ecological things mesh. And with the maybe possible future plan to recreate Earth's ecology back on Earth. Now, whether that's a good idea or even possible is kind of up for grabs in this book. I don't know. So,
Wow. Yeah.
those are just some ideas, which now we can, yeah.
Yeah. Cory, that's on.
Does that spark anything for you, Cory?
I think that science fiction is very good at telling you stories of how ideas can be banked for a long time and then come back. I think that's like a recurring motif in science fiction. Certainly when I think about Anne Lee's book, which spans these unbelievable timescales. It's quite ambitious, it reminds me I think it's in 70s by Neil Stephenson, at the end of Act 1, there's just a sentence, 15,000 years pass, right? And then we open up Act 2. And that there's something quite hopeful about the idea that nothing is ever extinguished and that currents re-emerge long after they've been suppressed. I was talking with Ada and Milo earlier about one of the best nonfiction books I've read recently, which was David Graeber and David Wengrow's book, The Dawn of Everything. So Graeber and Wengrow are respectively an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and they wanted to reconsider what we think about prehistory using modern methods and point out that so much of what we talk about when we talk about how things must have been given the remains and relics we have of old civilizations, cash out to just being a story that we've made up and that we've declared to be the only story that could possibly fit the facts. And what they do is come up with a whole bunch of stories that are at least as plausible and often more plausible that do not entertain or that do not lead inevitably to the world that we live in now. And so they're like, actually, the world that we live in now is not the only world we could possibly inhabit. We're not living history on rails. History can be whatever we make it. Our future can be whatever we make it. We have choices. We're not stuck in a kind of teleological march from the things that happened before us. And currents that were formerly extinguished can always come back. There's nothing to say that we are now in the midst of sort of 1,000-year regime in which the way that we array things now can never be changed. So I find that very exciting about science fiction. It's a double-edged sword. So my last but one novel was called The Lost Cause, and it's about white nationalist militia resurgence after a Green New Deal. And the title comes from one neo-Confederates called the Confederacy, The Lost Cause, and it's about this idea that even long after you think you've had truth and reconciliation with your ideological opponents and that they've been beaten and condemned to the scrap heap of history, the next thing you know, they're back again.
I love that book actually for that reason, but I did. I really enjoyed that. And yeah, because like my dumbass thought a few years ago, maybe the racists are going to die off and maybe like the queers have won and there's really no more work to do here. I was so wrong.
I think that's what makes
it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Like both the like hideous things that we kind of wish would die off.
I think that's what
We
makes
started
Handmaid's
back,
Tale
but also we have hope for the things that are under threat now.
I think that's what makes Handmaid's Tale so grim, right? Is it's this idea of defeat snatched from the jaws of victory. I read something by Chomsky this week where he talked about the kind of fretting that leftists do about elections and choosing the lesser of two evils. And he says, if you're an activist, an election is something you should pay attention to for about 15 minutes because most of the work is not the election. Most of the work is like what you do from day to day. The election tells you like kind of how much you can get done, like how much pressure you can put in the political arena on whichever leader wins it. But it's the actual work of being a political activist is not the work of pulling the lever, right? The work of being a political activist is all the other stuff you do. It's this long and endless grind. You can't just pull the lever and then go have brunch and wait 4 more years and go pull the lever again while the wise leaders that you elected go and do the job that you elected them to do. One of the reasons to like living in a democracy is not that you get to vote, is that you get to show up and shout at the people you elected when they screw up after you vote for them. And that's the actual important part of democracy, right? If all you get to do is vote, but then you have to stay home for 4 years until you vote again, not much is going to happen that you care about.
Active is the root of activist, after all. Yeah, good point. Yeah. So, to that end, what it's making me think about is ethics. It's making me think about like who's setting the rules. Like Cory, you mentioned the idea that we have choice. But how is that really enacted? Like, what is the role of government in this?
I'm not sure about government, but I think I might have spaced out right in the middle of your question. The first thing you said,
And I was thinking about 10 different things at once.
Right, exactly, but that's cool. So somewhere it'll intersect with what you just said. But I was just thinking that like we can invent technology that is so complicated that it can only be operated by enormous organisms we don't understand,
Exactly.
which is kind of a government.
Yeah. Well, overarching rule is where I'm headed. It's like that's where my brain is going. It's like, okay, so like what are the standards, or like who?
I don't think that it's bad to have technologies that are so complicated that they kind of start to run themselves, but not in the AI way, but in the, oh my God, it's so complicated that you need billionaires. Maybe I have very mixed feelings about that. Like,
Yes.
we don't need them. Space flight,
Space.
yeah, I do like space flight. But yeah, so I'm thinking of technology again on that sort of local level. So another thing I've been pulling out of a lot of books lately that are very, oh my God, we're in a climate disaster. We're practically in mid-apocalypse now. We're in mid-apocalypse right now. We're not even post, but one of the themes running through there is that localities, right, like will have to figure out how to make and operate their local technology in a way that works for them. Actually, a book going around that's been kind of hip for the last few years, Seeing Like a State. I forget the author. That's James Scott. Thank you, Ada. We should make our kids read this. Okay. Seeing Like a State, and it describes how like visibility into like centralized visibility into local kind of governments and communities means that they are trying to make those local systems legible and quantify them in data. So if you're at all nerdy or think about data or the internet or how giant companies operate, that is a lot of what's happening. And that's what's happening to our personal activities. Like we spend all day staring at our freaking phones. I do. Our computer, and it's gathering all our data and it's aggregating it, and things are happening with that data. So I'm thinking a lot about that. There is such a thing as activist movements for locally managed data stewardship and community data, like to say, hey, you're a little town or you're a reservation or whatever, and you, what data would you like to know about yourselves and what would you like to do with it? So it's not about sort of what does Amazon want to put in front of your eyeballs as far as advertising. It's like, what would be valuable to you, and then how can you use it for yourselves and to advocate for yourselves as a community? I maybe departed too far from technology.
No, I don't think that you did. I like all that is totally like relevant and interesting to me. I think for me, like the topic is technology and futures, but I'm always really concerned about, again, preserving some element of the past, like as we move forward into futures. So when you talk about we're sort of mid-apocalypse, I'm already thinking, like, what about the cultures that would say the apocalypse has already happened, right? So I naturally think of Native Americans, right? So I think about how are we looking back at Indigenous experience and pulling that forward to inform what we're doing with tech.
So I have another book that kind of does that, which is Macy Shaw's Kinning. Is another book I really wanted to bring up and recommend if you're at Everfair. It was like a steampunk, alternate history of the Congo. Yeah, which was done on kind of a dare, but then became very serious and really ended up very cool. Kinning is kind of about the sequel to that in 1922 as they sort of infect or popping around in time, but man, they're like infecting the world with these like spores and there's weird animal sex. I don't know, but no, not to frame it like that. It's really neat. It's very decolonizing. It's like, what if we decolonized via spores, telepathy, and strange new relationship building?
Transhuman.
But transhuman relationship building. And for me, that also touches on what I was saying originally about connections to an ecology. So we can think of these disasters and we can respond to them and say, the technology we need is a bunker. We need to like defend ourselves from the world and the disaster that's happening. We need to build a little microcosm. We need to build a generation ship or biosphere 2 or a literal bunker to protect all the seeds in the world. Or we could mutate, right? Or we could mutate and merge with the world and flow with the world and see what we're going to become. And that's just been a theme in so many science fiction books that I'm looking at.
I want to talk about a tension that I think is, not well theorized in science fiction, but I think is really important, and its relationship to technology is that I think that there's a kind of science fiction, and the thing that I like best about science fiction is this idea that you can challenge the inevitable narrative that there's only one way to array a technology. But like science fiction, one of its coolest tricks is to say, imagine if we had this gadget, but the gadget didn't work for and against the same people that works for now. What if someone else was using that gadget in some other way, right? That there's not just like one way to array a technology. And that this cuts,
like what?
well, like, I'm getting at. So this cuts against one of the ways that that I think Silicon Valley likes to hoodwink us, which is to have this teleological narrative of inevitabilism, right? Like, oh, the extermination of indigenous people was just like it was just a natural consequence of the progress of the Industrial Revolution, that our agrarian societies and hunter-gatherer societies would just automatically fall to this because that's just the way history goes. And when we keep marching through history, because we've all read the novels, we know that we're going to go to space. We know that we're going to have space navies, and we know that we're going to have VR, and we know that we're going to have this and that and the other. And big tech likes to use this, right? They like to say, everything that we deliver to you as a pre-feast menu cannot possibly be decomposed into an a la carte menu, right? If you want to search the internet, you have to let us spy on you, right? If you want to be friends with people on the internet, we also have to spy on you. So talking to your friends without being spied on is like having water that's not wet. Sure, it would make it easier to go out when it was raining, but come on, let's be serious here, And when they project themselves in the future, and we've heard this through the last several bubbles, and we hear in the bubbles that we're living through now. They say, well, of course we're going to have a metaverse. Didn't you see that Neil Stephenson documentary, Snow Crash? Right? There's absolutely going to be your destiny is to be a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character.
Everybody sign up.
And so then, this happened with cryptocurrency. Well, of course, markets, everything will be devolve into markets. Of course, everything's going to be a spot market. Why would we do it that way? I mean, we all know this. We've read our timeline, right? And now we have it with AI, right? The number of discussions I've had about AI that go, well, of course, AI is going to get better and it's here to stay. Of course, AI is here to stay. Like, it's a genuinely weird kind of goldfish memory, no object permanence ass thing to say AI is going to stay when the entire history of AI is a series of AI winters in which you have this huge bubble of AI, and then like 10 seconds later, everyone's like, oh no, I'm not doing AI. What I'm doing is absolutely not AI. Please don't associate what I'm doing with AI. Everyone knows that the last time around was bullshit, right? And so this idea that AI is here to stay, and like it's not going to be like asbestos in our walls, and we're going to stick AI into every product, and then the industry is going to collapse, and we're just going to be like dealing with the AI that's even less functional because the foundation models are offline forever because no one's going to pump $700,000 a day into just providing the water for the chillers for the AI servers. Right? All of this comes out of science fiction, right? This all comes out of science fiction, right? This is all people saying, well, of course it's true because we've all watched those science fiction documentaries, right? We all understand that R2-D2 is coming and the Terminator is coming and all these other things are coming because we all read it in our science fiction novels. And for me, when I read a science fiction novel in which a thing is happening, I'm not so much of a dope that I'm like, oh, it's a prediction, right? I'm like, this is a reaction to the present time. It's a parable. It's a way of talking about what's happening right now. Nostradamus is a fraud, and if he were real, why would we ever get out of bed again? Because like if the future is arriving, then what role do we play in it? And so we talk about technology, what's working, what's not. I think that it's like really important to note that a lot of people weaponize science fiction
As
to
propaganda.
insist that you can never have the parts of the technology that's good for you without the parts that are just destroying your life.
That's one perspective.
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna go into the whole enshittification.
We can talk about that too, but
I'm intrigued by the essay I saw, the enshittification of TikTok. I did want to ask about that. I don't know if this is the right segue.
if you'd like, I mean, just, generically, it's weird that we live in a time where platforms dominate the internet. If you remember 25 years ago, we were all excited about disintermediation. And we did, in fact, disintermediate all the old intermediaries. Then we replaced it with new intermediaries. And like the critical form of the internet is like the business that has business customers on one side and end users on the other, whether that's Uber or Amazon or eBay or Google or Facebook. It's all like mediating between two different groups of people and skimming value off the middle. And they all seem to follow the same pathology where they lure in end users by being good to them. And then they make things worse for them once they're locked in, and they lure in business customers by being good to them. And then this is the part where most people miss it. They're like, oh, well, Facebook sucks for users because it's great for advertisers. Actually, Facebook sucks for advertisers too. And Facebook sucks for everyone except Facebook shareholders, right? And that is the terminal phase, is when the company has withdrawn all the value from end users, withdrawn all the value from business customers, leaves behind just enough that everyone stays stuck to the platform, and gives all the value to their shareholders. And we're all stuck in these kind of denuded, miserable places that we can't seem to escape because of various kinds of both social and technical lock-in. And for me, the thing that's interesting about enshittification is that it's all happening now, right? That lots of companies are all going bad at the same time. These companies have gone bad before. MySpace was good and then it was bad, right? But what's happening now is these companies are all going bad at once. And I think it's because they no longer fear competition because they've all gobbled each other up. Tom Eastman calls it an internet of five giant websites full of screenshots of text from the other four, right? And that we're also living in a moment where they don't have to worry about regulators, because when you only got like 5 companies in a sector, they can dominate their regulators, do whatever they want. Tech workers don't have power. They can't tell their bosses to go to hell when they ask them to ruin the thing that they, missed their mother's funeral to deliver on time. And, reverse engineering is a thing of the past because now they'll sue you into the ground for hacking their tools and putting an ad blocker into it or an alternative client. And so the companies can just do whatever they want. So you have the same people running these companies who show up for work every day, yank on the giant lever called enshittification. And what used to happen is the lever wouldn't move very far because there were competitors, regulators, their own workers, and interoperability. And now the lever just moves all the way. And so all these guys whose whole mission, their whole careers, was figuring out how to take value from you and give it to themselves, can take more value from you and give it to themselves than they ever could before.
Well, I think we could do a whole extra panel on, that lasted all day, on like how we could take the internet back.
Yeah.
Okay, yay.
But that's right.
Sure.
But I was just gonna say, what I've kind of observed is people using things is they stop talking to each other on Facebook mostly, and they're talking in little private chats.
Yeah.
They're doing private chats, and you've got like 15 billion chats with like 3 different groups of friends, and it all intersects, and it's very hard to keep track of who's in what chat. You're gonna offend by suddenly talking bad about them. But no, not that I would ever do that. But people are taking those tools private, and of course, we don't want to say in order to have good technology, you have to build it yourself. Oh yeah, right. We're all going to become magical software developers, write a full operating system, and then share it with our 100 friends and family. That's probably not going to happen. But we could actually try to build that world where those tools exist, and you could take it and create your local server and have a mesh network that is just your neighborhood. Like we could build that, and I think people are building it. Often because they're too remote from, of course, Starlink is going to ruin that, but because they're so, or fix it, I don't know, improve some things, like we want refrigerators and access to information, but we don't want to be spied on and showed ads all day. I don't know.
I don't think you need Starlink for a refrigerator.
No, but what I was going to say is because you don't have access to
Sure.
the bigger internet and extensive devices that can run the bigger high-speed internet, you build local community mesh networks. And I think we actually need to do that. beyond ham radio, you know, I love the idea of ham radio. I haven't done it, but I did sign up to be like a neighborhood, like a community emergency response person in San Francisco. It's called NERD, neighborhood emergency response team. Now, part of my motivation for doing that is because of the technology I depend on. So like in a disaster, which I saw during Katrina, like if you're disabled, you're going to get shunted into some sort of shitty hospital and, you know, treated like luggage. And and I would like to be quite near to some nice firefighters who have a generator so that I can charge my battery on my wheelchair. And so there's actually like Anita Cameron is a person who started making the CERT system federally like more accessible so that disabled people can become first responders for disasters. And part of that is because that helps us survive better personally, like as disabled people. And so I have this technology, like I said, I want the refrigerators and the information and the wheelchairs, you know, without the crappy parts of technology. And we just have, that's a struggle and we have to actively construct it, you know, and a lot of science fiction, I think, tries to outline ways we can actively construct it. Sometimes not literally, like, how do I build a computer? You know, how do we do the parts I have questions about is how are we mining all that metal and how are we putting together these transistors or whatever? But I will hand wave through that a little bit and just say, you can kind of see where people try to construct a local technology and a sort of terroir, right? Like, am I saying that right? Yeah. Yeah. Like, so the idea that like the local geography of where you are influences the epigenetics, right? Like of living organisms and of the culture of that thing. So just like your wine might taste different because of where it is grown, like our technology should be different because of where it is grown and used and what we want it to do. So I think that's how we have to think of it.
So that's really interesting to me. So this idea, like we talked about very like sort of high level, like broad, you know, metaverse, but like you are bringing it very like focal, like very specific to when you say local mesh networks, like this is very practical. These are ways that sci-fi can inform what we actually are doing. And I'm not familiar with this term mesh, but can you say more like what do you mean by local neighborhood mesh?
Well, like a network that can send information and communicate over short distances in a network.
That's
like
not internet based. Like you're not talking about an app like next door. You're not talking about
right.
Okay.
It's like I've got an antenna on my roof and it can see as far as sort of 2 houses over, but the house 2 houses over has an antenna that will pick up my signal and relay them further.
Gotcha.
So they form a mesh.
Okay.
Yes, but you don't have to connect to the bigger internet. And you
so other than ham radio, what are ways that people do that, right?
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of questions, like things that you need to think about. It's really, I appreciate you bringing it really like practical, right?
Yeah.
Like
And there's lots of people.
There's an Oakland organization that does it. Yeah.
And there's an interesting corollary between the idea that when you design for accessibility, you make things better for everyone, to the idea that when you design for low technology or low reliability environments, you also create situations where things are robust for lots of people who aren't necessarily an emergency. So like there are a bunch of network architectures, like there's a thing called Scuttlebutt. That's a way of sending messages that doesn't assume that the network is reliable. So what it does, it uses this interesting cryptographic stuff where I can hold a message for you without knowing who it's for or knowing what's inside of it. I just have a little encrypted blob. And so when someone says, do you have any encrypted blobs that haven't been delivered yet? I say, yes, they're all my encrypted blobs. And the idea is that some of those encrypted blobs travel over the internet, go to a central server. And so I'm online, I go and ask the central server, hey, any encrypted blobs that match my signature?
Yep.
But also, Scuttlebutt was created by anarchist sailors. And so also I might go into a place like a port where there is a hard drive that I can go like, hey, are there any encrypted blobs for me? Or I might run into someone in the harbor and say, here's my encrypted blobs, there's your encrypted blobs.
I want to be an encrypted blob.
yeah,
just
that's fine. So this is like a very interesting idea because you can imagine that there are lots of times when you want to send someone a message or you want to do something and you're offline or the internet is down or you're on an airplane like I was this morning coming up from Burbank or whatever. We're just having this, formerly this is called a store and forward architecture. It used to be very common on networks before we had this pervasive always on internet. These architectures were really common. And we've kind of forgotten how to use them. And yet they're I won't call them a solved problem, but they're a well theorized problem. that there are lots of interesting and cool things we can do it. And, you know, if we design all of our technologies to have an offline mode, right, where they can just soar up and then reconnect later, then, yeah, we're helping. We might do this in the name of disaster preparedness, but what we end up with is just technology that, generally speaking, is more robust.
Yeah, because if the grid were to fall tomorrow.
Yeah. Or if your shitty monopoly ISP goes down, right?
So the future is the Pony Express.
That's book, Sarah.
Yeah, I know.
Sarah,
you know, that
those.
Wanted, something women wanted. It's about women postal delivery.
Upright Women Wanted, Sarah Gailey.
Thank you, Sarah Gailey. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, just doing a time check. Wait, wondering, so we have about
Oh,
10
you're good.
minutes. We are good, but there was one other really important point, and I think we touched on it a little bit, the whole pretty high thing. Like,
Sure.
do you want to?
Yeah,
Speak to
there's a scholar I really like at Virginia Tech called Lee Vinsel, and he coined this very useful term, which is crita-hype. This is when you take the thing that your person you're criticizing says about themselves at face value and then criticize it. So like Facebook claims that they're a bunch of dopamine hacking wizards who can make you believe anything. And there are a bunch of critics of Facebook who go, oh my God, do you know why your uncle became a racist? It's because Facebook hacked his dopamine and made him racist, and that's why he voted for Trump. And there's, you know, another explanation. It's a lot more parsimonious, right? That it's just like, your uncle was always a racist creep who just got emboldened. And Facebook is no better at having a mind control ray than anyone who's ever claimed to do it, which is everyone who's ever claimed to do it turns out to be a liar, Mesmer, Rasputin, the CIA, MK Ultra, pickup artists, neurolinguistic programming weirdos. They're all full of shit. And they're even putting themselves in the news. But, you know, when you run around and you say, hey, Facebook has a mind control ray, isn't that terrifying? They take that on their sales calls. And they say, why should you pay a 40% premium to advertise on Facebook? Well, I don't know if you've heard my critics, but I built a mind control. Right? If there's anyone in northerly latitudes you'd like to sell ice cream to, I'm your man, right? I've got their technology. We see similar things with AI, right? Where there's a way of critiquing AI that says, AI sucks at writing now, but it's going to be really good soon, and then it's going to steal all of our jobs, right? That's the thing that we've all heard, right? There's another critique of it, which is that AI sucks. Your boss doesn't care. Your boss is insatiably horny for firing you or replacing you with automation. And they don't care if what it produces is garbage. And they think that they can cram it down their audience's throat because they've got a monopoly. And so this is the reason AI is going to take our jobs. And the thing is, if you run around and you say, AI is only going to get better, you're helping Sam Altman sell stock, right? This cites facts, not in evidence, right? This is this idea that somehow for the first time in history, a technology, instead of being an S curve where it's kind of flat, you discover something, you get some progress, and then it flattens out again. This one's going to be the permanent infinite curve. It's going to go asymptotic to infinity for the first time in history. That's just a way to help him get rich, right? You're not criticizing him. You're his pitch man. So I think that when we talk about tech criticism, it's really important not to fall back on science fiction parables about AI, which are not documentaries and not predictions, and to really separate the fantasies we have when we tell each other cool stories from things in the world that are actually true. Also, Elon Musk is an Iron Man.
Oh no, I've got to do this. I'm not sure how to actually speak to that, but I had one more thing I want to say.
We have
moderation.
7 minutes, please.
It was I guess it was like an example of an interesting sort of a thing with tech and culture and disasters, which is the thing I'm kind of talking about. Which is the book Mars House by Natasha Pulley, if anybody's read it. It is really, really interesting. It is sort of the Earth in a little bit in the future. The disaster is like hitting critical mass. Earth refugees are being forced or flocking to Mars, which has had a colony going for some hundreds of years, and the people on Mars have evolved to be quite tall and ethereal, and breathe thin air in the gorge. They live in the canyon, the canyon within this atmosphere. And they're also tangentially, giant woolly mammoths that go around Mars, like talking to each other telepathically and matriarchally.
But people are woolly mammoths, or they're
no. There are also woolly.
There are also
forget the woolly mammoths. Throw them out. They can have their own culture, but the refugees on Earth are face this enormous bias and prejudice and fear. And they're called like the Earth Strong because basically, if you're a Martian, an Earth person just bumping into you on the street could just kill you. Right? They just rip your leg off by accident because they're like these dwarfish, like incredibly strong people who could fuck you up accidentally and destroy like your building. You know, like they are dangerous and they live in a special ghetto. And if to leave that area or to have any kind of horrible low-paid menial work, they have to wear these exoskeletons that keep them contained and are quite heavy and chafe and are terrible, like wearing manacles, right? Or they can take the operation, become citizens. If the operation basically gives them motor neuron disease, so they are now wheelchair users who are like weaker muscularly and have a shorter lifespan and have all kinds of other health problems, but now they can become citizens and fully participate in society and have jobs and so on. So it's this terrible choice. And then there's also a whole romance frenemies thing. Oh my God, it's like crack.
What was the name again?
Mars House.
Okay.
But I guess where I wanted to go with this is it is not questioned from the Martians' point of view or most of the Earthers. Like, why couldn't we use this medical technology in a better way? Like, what if we did something better with this that didn't kill us and make us live until we're 40 and, you know, and kill our children and we have all this stuff. What if you helped us, or, you know, we made an enclave over there that wasn't horrible? And they just raise a lot of questions and have to change the minds. They have to reframe the whole thing for the Martian people in power and the general Martian culture. So they're the part of the political marriage is happening is because they're trying to kind of culture hack, but part of it, you know, I forgot where I was going with this. But I lost the plot completely, but it's that kind of book. And what I really liked about it is it looks at sort of a disabled future. That's another book I wanted to just like come to you guys, which is Leah Lakshmi Vidyanza Samaral Sinha's book, The Future is Disabled, which you may know like her other work, like Care Work and other books. Great stuff. The Future is Disabled is just really neat. It opens saying, I believe in the disabled future. And
What does that mean?
what does that mean? Well, read the book to find out. But if you think about the Mars House model or a lot of these other books where people need different kinds of assistive technology to exist in the world, maybe that's the atmoscarf that you're wearing on the rings of Jupiter and mimicking on successes, or maybe it's that you are reincarnated in some weird way and have to live in a cyborg body. So we know a lot of those awesome murder bots and cyborgs who have a very technologically integrated future.
Is Mars House a riff on Beach House?
I don't know. Good question.
Well, thank you. I love how you both have like interspersed like all these books. Like now thank you for increasing my, to be read list by tons of books. We have just about 3 minutes left. Any final words before we open up for discussion and Q&A?
Let me look at my notes here. So I'll say that one of the cool things that I think our digital technology does when we talk about what works and also what doesn't,
Yes.
is that our current tech, the cool thing that digital technology does is it makes it easier to form groups and mobilize them. So there's an economist who's kind of a dick, as many of them are, who won a Nobel Prize. This is also a good predictor that you're a dick. The economics Nobel Prize is not a real Nobel Prize. Economists got sad because they thought that they weren't being taken seriously, so they founded a prize and called it the Nobel Prize. Seriously, that's what happened. So this guy, Ronald Coase, he wrote this paper called The Theory of the Firm. And he basically asked, why do we have institutions, right? Why are there like nonprofits and the mafia and schools and corporations and the Catholic Church and the government? And he said it's because when two people want to do something together, they can at their best do something superhuman, exceed the capacity of one person. But that they have to have a certain amount of coordination, right? If we're both making a sweater, we have to figure out who's going to make the left sleeve and who's going to make the right sleeve. Otherwise, we end up with a lot of left sleeves, right? So what we build these institutions for is to reduce the number of meetings we have to get stuff done, basically. It's to streamline stuff. There are lots of different ways to structure institutions, authoritarian, cooperative, whatever. What the internet has done, though, year on year for decades now, has monotonically reduced the amount of institutional overhead associated with doing ever more ambitious things, which is super cool, right? We make operating systems and encyclopedias now the way that, we used to do like really ambitious bake sales, right? So this is really awesome. It also means that we can mobilize huge groups of people for things like the Women's March and Black Lives Matter parades and so on. It also means that if you want to find the 700 absolute weirdos who really burn to dress up in, Confederate drag and march through the streets of Charlottesville with tiki torches, chanting Jews will not replace us, a thing that would have been impossible before we had low-cost group formation and mobilization, right? You can do that too. So it's a double-edged sword. But there's something really exciting, even as like a, woolly socialist who likes the idea of governments doing a lot of stuff. I love the idea that we need smaller governments to do more things, and that the existing institutions we have can do more things still. And to tie this back into the genre, this was the prompt that I started with when I wrote my novel Walk Away, which is what if we could have a space program or a luxury resort that we maintain the way that we maintain Wikipedia or a big open source software project. And that's, I think it's an exciting idea. It's also a terrifying idea because it also means like, what if you could have a bioterror plot that doesn't need, the US government and the CIA to run it, and it could just be like 6 weirdos with a lot of eschatological red pilling,
Yes, that. Parting words from you, Liz.
Parting words for me would be that everything we're thinking about and talking about here with technology and culture, I think we can also kind of reframe that in our relationship to technology, right? Like we have a relationship with other people. We see in all these books where you have non-humans with different levels of sentience, that the relationships between all of those entities is important too. But we can also think about our relationship with our technology. Like, how do I feel about my phone? How do I treat my phone? What is my relationship with this wheelchair, with my car, whatever? Is it a relationship of respect and mutuality, and we have to take that into the future. So when people use a certain intelligence bar to say, when you hit this intelligence, if you are this high in intelligence, then you can ride this ride. No, then we treat you as a person, or we treat you with respect, or we give you legal status, or I think that's actually like, maybe that's important to make that distinction in some situations, but in most, maybe it isn't. And maybe it's not important that it even be a living thing. Like maybe we need to treat, for example, land that we live on with respect and mutuality and care and, stewardship. So that's what I would say about tech.
Did you ever read Maria Farrell's This Is Your Phone on Feminism? Boy, is that something you'd like.
Oh yeah, okay.
So she does this talk where she says to people, put up your hand if you use your phone all the time. So put up your hand if you use your phone all the time. Now, keep your hand up if you like your phone. Right? And usually a lot of hands go down, right? And she says, this is the definition of an abusive relationship. That's very smart. Boy, is Maria Farrell.
That's so interesting because when Liz was talking, the first thing I thought of was in terms of my relationship to my devices, I immediately thought of my bedside Alexa and how when she can't answer me, I get so mad. Like, I'm like, do better, Alexa. Let me down. Like, but I don't have my phone.
Right.
No.
But we can build things with that respect embedded.
Yeah.
As people who are building tech.
So interesting. Well, I think we're at time and we wanted to have time to open up for some questions. Thank you both so much. Like my mind is blown. And I know,
Moderation.
yeah. Oh, I try to hang in there with you. I think we have some questions maybe on chat at all. Does anything come in? No? Okay, awesome. Questions? Yes, sir. First hand.
So how much of the problem with big tech, the social media, is driven by the fact that they are an ad-driven model that the user pays?
I have an answer, but I want to let Liz answer.
Oh. Go first.
Okay, no, I don't think that's the problem. I think that, so for one thing, we've had advertising driven stuff for a long time without this invasiveness, that the two are not necessarily coupled. I think that the reason advertising stuff is so invasive is that Congress last updated federal privacy law in 1988, federal consumer privacy law. They passed a law called the Privacy Protection Act. It makes it illegal for video store clerks to tell newspapers what VHS cassettes you take home, like free technologies that don't exist anymore. And they have not updated consumer privacy since. So the reason we get spied on is not because of advertising. The reason we get spied on is because we have native control. And that's what we should do. But also this idea that if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, I think badly misunderstands why companies abuse you. It's not that paying for the product is a customer loyalty program that buys you respect. Companies treat utilities they can get away with. So, Apple gave everyone this box that you can tick on your iPhone that opts you out of Facebook spying. Well, all apps spy. And 96% of iOS users click that box. Presumably the other 4% either work for Facebook or were briefly confused, right? Immediately as they were doing this, it cost, according to Facebook, $10 billion to Facebook in the first year. You love to see it. Apple also instituted a program of covert surveillance of their iOS users for the purpose of fueling a targeted ad network. So these people did not get a free phone. They spent $1,000 on their iPhone. They're not in the ad-supported ecosystem. And yet, Apple, even though they were paying for the product, treated them as the product. John Deere doesn't give you a free tractor. You spend $600,000 in your tractor, and John Deere will still gouge you on parts and repair. Not because you didn't pay for the product. It's not an ad-supported tractor. It's because they have a monopoly, right? So what we have is not an advertising problem. We have a monopoly problem. And the corruption that goes with it.
I work on Firefox, so some of it is on free software and ads. But yeah, I would say that we did have advertising, like obviously before the internet. And that was the first thing, as a person using the internet pre-web, the first thing I came out of my mouth when I saw the Mosaic browser was, holy shit, they're going to put advertising on our computers. And that was considered ridiculous, but that indeed came to pass very quickly. And those ads were, I think, not effective, until quite recently. So we can look at by effective. I mean, it didn't really work. It didn't really make anyone any money. It was just like a magical, weird hamster wheel of money being poured in until it did something. And there was a very long stretch of probably 20 years where it didn't do anything. Right? And I worked in the industry, in fact, in the ad-supported, put ads on your blog network, and called Blog about women blogging. And did those ads work? No. There were, my opinion, there were just companies with enormous ad budgets who were pivoting away from television to banner ads and blog ads and blah blah blah, and then they pivoted to video. And those things, none of those things worked or did anything, but they could measure something, and so they thought, and so they could use it to sell stuff because they were salespeople who sell stuff. They're selling the importance of what they're doing to the people giving them money and budgets, and they've got to figure out what to do with it. They finally got enough data aggregated to where it kind of works. And I'm like, I can't even look at Facebook because I want to buy shit. I'm like, it sells me something that I actually want. I'm like, no.
So I would caution against over trusting the effectiveness of surveillance advertising. So like Procter and Gamble,
I guess, but
they have $100 million a year.
I hate it.
But their own account of how well it works. So Procter and Gamble had a $100 million per year programmatic advertising spend. Programmatic advertising, the industry euphemism for surveillance ad. They turned that into a $0 a year budget, and they saw no difference.
No change. Yeah, exactly.
So that the amount of
It's
fraud
bullshit.
is insane. The amount of bad targeting is insane. Facebook has these things, similar audiences. So like you're like, well, I want to target these ads to 18 to 34-year-old man children with an Xbox who've been searching recently for information about gonorrhea. And I need 1 million of those in the Bay Area. And
I think I get those ads.
Facebook says, incredibly enough, I can only find 600,000 of those, but I have 400,000 similar people that I'm just going to charge you full ride for to reach, right? And so, I just would caution against the belief that it used to not work and now it works. I think it just kind of never worked perfectly, and it's always been widely overstated.
But also, he's asking sort of about a user owning the thing. So do we own the internet? Do we own our computers? Do we own the data on our computers? Maybe not so much because it's all in the cloud. do we own the software that we buy, or are we subscribing to it? And then we're just like completely screwed. We're all like subscribed to a million things that we can't afford, and we can't even own like a movie or a book. Or,
Yeah,
so that's bad, I think. And I think we would
yeah.
hard agree.
So here's the thing, is that as IP law,
Write the DRL right off that shit.
right, so this is the thing, right, as IP law has crept in and made it more unlawful for you to change your own device, right? So the same law that makes it illegal for you to break the DRM on Kindle also makes it illegal for you to break your DRM on a phone. And so if you're like having a product,
People need to know what a DRM is.
digital rights management, the encryption that stops you from copying things. If we're having a product meeting for our website and I say, folks, here it is. I figured out that we can get a 2% extra marginal gain on our ads if we make them 20% more obnoxious. Someone in the room is going to put their hand up and say, okay, but what if that triggers 40% of people to go to the search engine and type, how do I block ads? Because if they do that, then the revenue from those 40% of users, it doesn't stay at the 100%, it doesn't rise to the 102, it goes to 0 and it stays there. It never comes back. No one's ever going to go to the search engine and type, how do I start seeing ads again? But if we're putting ads in our apps, right, where it's illegal to reverse engineer it, so it's illegal to add ad blockers to it, then the answer isn't, no, we can't do that. The answer is, why don't we make them 100% more obnoxious, right? This is why every company wants to use your app. To a first approximation, an app is a web page where it's a felony to put an ad blocker.
Right, right.
Did that answer the question?
No.
We went somewhere with it.
Yeah,
Like,
we did good.
We ran in a different
Yeah.
direction.
Question didn't relate to how effective it was for Procter & Gamble. It related to how effective it was for Facebook. Clearly, Facebook makes billions on advertising. So it's the effectiveness of the person who's selling the shovel, not the effectiveness of the person with the gold.
Look, people who sell advertising to advertisers have always been better at selling advertising to advertisers than selling advertising products to us. You know,
Right.
John Wanamaker, who founded Wanamaker's
If you
department
want
store.
to start a company that isn't stealing or buying money, and as a author, the pirate commented, then who's going to fund the company? So if you get a user pay model where users pay for actual value, instead of it's free, so everybody uses it, you could possibly get away.
But that's just empirically wrong. John Deere shareholders beheld the company in which people were paying for tractors and said, no, you have to steal those users' data too, right? So this, like, the thing that stops companies from spying on you is not that you're making enough money without spying on someone. It's that spying on you doesn't make you money, but costs you money because the Federal Trade Commission shows up and displays your top executives in stocks while people pelt them with rotten vegetables. Right? Anything less will not stop companies from spying on
To be
And-
clear, buy the book, thus paying your author, hopefully, and then crack the deal.
Yes. We have time for one last question. So
So my background is in purchasing, and one of the things that really shows up when you start going into the history of purchasing is that there's centralization, and then because that allows you to negotiate bigger contracts, you have more buying power, you get a broader range of products, but humans are not known for their moderation. So that gets out of control, and all of a sudden you've got contracts that are completely out of scale, and the smaller companies on the outskirts are saying, you're not taking care of us anymore, and then corporations go to decentralization, and they give more power to everybody on the outskirts. And when I'm listening to the panel today, what I'm hearing is almost that the internet is at the point where the centralization is now getting past the point of value. And when we look at what did you call it, webbing or netting or meshing, now we're starting to come back in and decentralize. But the problem I see is that, like, where does the globalization come in when you start to decentralize? So I feel like, if this is something that heads in that direction, we're going to start decentralizing to the point where now that's not working and we're not getting the benefits of the fire control that's happening in the Amazon, and, we've lost that skill. So,
I
like,
wish
do you
there were,
see
like,
that kind of happening in the
Places,
pattern?
like, if there was a way to say, like, what are the things that should have the economies of scale, like, applied? Like, maybe there are things that would be good for everyone, and maybe there are things that wouldn't. I mean, I don't know, you're asking two kind of semi-socialist anarchists, so.
We have 60 seconds.
So I would say that, I would say that I don't recognize that account that things become centralized and then and then it just becomes so untenable that they start to decentralize. I think what happens is you have crises, right? So the first antitrust action in America were the Grangers, right? Farmers who had a semi-violent uprising over controlled grain elevators and rails, right? That, like, in the same way that we're going to decarbonize no matter what. We either decarbonize because we make choices, or we decarbonize because we render ourselves extinct. We are going to decarbonize in the same way centralization produces the instability that leads to decentralization one way or the other, because one thing that's pretty decentralized is a civilization that's collapsed.
But in that situation, is untenuous not a synonym for uprising?
Yeah, sure. So, but I don't think that it's like the central, I guess maybe I've misread your point, but I don't think it's that the intermediary that's become so powerful goes, well, this isn't working anymore. I'll voluntarily cede my power. I think that you get crises, right? And then you get power is seized and distributed.
Yes.
And we can build semi-stable institutions that maintain that stop intermediaries from getting too powerful. There's nothing wrong with intermediaries. I don't mind that there's booksellers. Right. I like that I don't have to stand on. There was a guy when I grew up in Toronto, used to stand on a street corner with a sign that said, "Very famous Canadian author, buy my books." Right. Like, all power to him. He was a great guy, cried Kalani. But I'm glad I don't have to do that. He also had a sign that said Margaret Atwood.
And that's a wrap, folks.